Hi. So this lecture we're going to look at literary arcs in narrative, character ensemble, as well as I want to briefly discuss exposition versus detailed scene composition. The objectives for this lecture are terms and definitions, discussion on narrative, and we're going to be using a famous German pyramid structure to do that, as well as the character arc and symbolic arc. And of course, writing a scene as opposed to exposition, like kind of summarizing it or telling it. So terms and definitions, a narrative arc. So an arc obviously is a line of change or movement, birth, life, death, beginning, middle, and end. So if you notice the graph where you can see the visual movement of an arc, so regardless of what kind of arc, this movement is going to basically stay the same. It's going to start low, move up, descend. As far as terms and definitions, I've given you a definition of narrative arc as well as a character arc. So, of course, you can pause this. I don't feel the need to read it because, of course, you can read it. I've also want to talk about a literary definition of a symbol. So this is, because of course we're in creative writing, I want to look at the literary definition. So a symbol is a thing that represents or stands in or for something else. And it is normally a material object, so something that we can hold, touch, smell, taste. It's concrete. And it is normally representing something abstract, like the idea of justice or peace or goodwill, joy, happiness, love. For example, a flag is the symbol of a nation, its borders, and its people. So exposition is the introduction to your piece of writing, your manuscript. The exposition, like the actual writing, is sometimes referred to as Act 1 of the story arc. Here you are starting the story. You're bringing out your characters, setting up the motions of conflict, and you might be, as they say in film, laying pipe, in that you're providing background information where you may lay down the 5 W's, the who, what, when, where, and why. You'll also be revealing your cast of characters, usually, and maybe not fully, but definitely we're probably going to see the protagonist. How is your reader going to differentiate among these characters? How are you going to make each character come alive? And of course, you're going to introduce us in the exposition point of the narrative arc. You're going to also introduce us to the setting. So where is this story taking place? And please don't forget that setting is including time. So what time period is your story taking place in? And also you want to think of mood or tone. So what is this tone you're in? And often we can think of that in terms of genre, horror, romance, comedy, and so on. Once you know your mood and tone, you're often going to know what genre you're in, and vice versa. So these are aspects considered in your exposition, that first part of your story, of your piece of material, the beginning of your work. Remember, and this is a word of caution, show, don't tell. Don't mistake exposition for an opportunity for an information dump. So consider how Tolkien introduces the dwarves, the Hobbit. There's this massive party going on, and there's this mayhem and chaos, and Bilbo is struggling to serve tea. And this is all going on as we're introducing these characters. So rising action, also known as the inciting incident, it's the moment, for example, Katniss's sister Prim is picked during the reaping. Whatever the circumstances that you have created, this is the key trigger. This is the event that rolls the dice and causes a series of events to escalate. So in many ways, you're setting the rest of your story in motion at this point. So the work here is to develop your characters while allowing relationships between your characters to deepen. This is the time when you escalate the conflict, and as well your tension is going to escalate. So at the climax point in your story arc, the storylines, motives, character arcs sort of run into one another. It's often the moment of truth for the protagonist. It's the moment, the event to which the plots build up, the peak of the arc, when the external and internal journeys come together. So falling action. So consider your reader. For example, in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, the reader sees Harry wake up in the infirmary and he chats it up with Dumbledore. We, the readers, see that. And we see Dumbledore award Neville Longbottom the 10 house points that win Gryffindor the House Cup. Here are a few things to keep in mind during the writing of falling action. Remember, this may be the place to resolve any remaining subplots and many conflicts. Use this time and use this space to tie up any and all of those dangling threads. So resolution, this is the conclusion of the piece of material, the wrap-up. For example, in Agatha Christie novels, the detective gathers everyone in a room and reveals the whodunit, explaining everything. Questions are resolved and ends are happily wrapped up, or if not happily, wrapped up. So remember, there's always room for experimentation. Disrupting reader expectations can be exciting. However, like the standardized rules of grammar, it's best to know the rules and be adept at using them before you try to break them. So, of course, the Freytag's pyramid doesn't work with every story. And to name a few, Jack Kerouac's On the Road, which doesn't really have a narrative arc. Or Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird possesses two arcs, the arcs of Tom Robinson and Boo Radley. So there's also character arc. So without meaningful characters or a character arc, the reader is going to wonder, like, why do I care? So your characters are what invest your readers. It's what makes readers care. So the character arc is referring to how your characters are growing and changing over the course of your story. So a successful character arc isn't going to happen all at once. In fact, if your character changes too quickly, it can be confusing and unconvincing for your reader. Ideally, your character should change through their actions, their thoughts, and through the events that you're creating that surround and impact them. Think of this in terms of key moments or turning points. And remember, show. Don't tell me the character has changed. Show me. Character arcs are probably so important to readers because they remind us of ourselves and our own possibilities for change, growth, improvements, and our own weaknesses and flaws and failures. There are different types of character arcs. The hero's journey is, for example, a type of a character arc. The first and perhaps most common arc is one of change and our complete transformation. So this is the hero's journey, also known as the Bildungsroman, a plot structure found in many coming-of-age films and books. This character arc involves a complete change from regular person to hero or savior. Normally, we see this with the main character, the protagonist. The change and transformation arc usually begins with a seemingly ordinary person becoming someone extraordinary. The character unleashes aspects of themselves unknown even to them, but which they locate along their journey of self-discovery, like Harry Potter, like Bilbo Baggins, Luke Skywalker, and Katniss Everdeen. So you see there's kind of a mythic or an epic quality to the hero's journey. The growth arc is different in that the character grows but doesn't necessarily embark upon a complete change or transformation. By the end of the story, they're usually and essentially the same person, but they've overcome something within themselves. They're fuller, rounder, different in some very intrinsic way. So think of Jaime Lannister in the Game of Thrones television series, or Samwise Gamgee in the Lord of the Rings series. There's also a negative character arc that's called the fall arc. It involves the decline or fall of the character through bad choices they've made. And in this arc, traditionally, the character has usually died or become corrupted or lost their mind, or sometimes all three by the end of the story. They experience no redemption or salvation, only downfall and despair, and have usually ruined their own life as well as often the lives of others or people that have surrounded them. For example, Walter White in Breaking Bad, Hamlet, of course, in Shakespeare's Hamlet, Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars series, and famously, although these other ones are famous as well, Dorian Gray from The Picture of Dorian Gray. So a symbolic arc. So symbols aren't necessarily a one-to-one equation. So a heart isn't always going to represent love. Symbolic dimensions in your writing and in all writing should be dynamic. For example, consider how we think of surgical masks since the pandemic. Think of how you want to imbue your own work with symbols and symbolism and using these as arcs. Images help us feel an idea. Don't allow an abstraction to sit on its own without concreteness to it. So think of that you always have to anchor your abstractions. Anchor them in the concrete, in the real, in the material. I mean, ideally, it's even better if you can get rid of abstractions pretty much altogether. Creative writing isn't academic writing. It isn't about telling your reader what you're thinking. It's about showing them. It's about evoking responses in them. So remember that your symbols shouldn't feel awkward. It should, when you construct them and build them in, they should feel fluid. They should make sense. They shouldn't be obtrusive, shock, or stand up at attention. They should just unfold naturally and organically. So when it comes to exposition, and I don't mean exposition in the beginning of a narrative arc, in this case, I'm talking about exposition that is just very generalized writing, as opposed to writing an actual scene, or exposition is telling. So you want to replace that, not the beginning of the story, don't get these two things mixed up, but you want to replace telling with detail, with showing. So, for example, telling, just one moment, please. So, for example, telling will often take place in a general past. We would always have tea in the morning. It will lack concrete nouns. He knew he shouldn't drive fast, but he did anyway. It tells. She has a way of leaving things to the last minute. Whereas if you're writing scenes, they will take place in situated moments. I pour hot water in a mug and hand him a tea bag. It will use nouns that are concrete and verbs that are active. White crosses where the highway bends. His shoulders brace against the bucket seat as he brakes, then accelerates and hugs the inside corner. I apologize. My son is still up and it's close to bedtime and I'm trying to wrap this up. So you will want to show and not tell. So for example, she chews Ritalin as if it is a smooth candied orb like an M&M before she opens her laptop. So thank you. And I hope that you're all well. Of course, I hope this was helpful. And again, if you have any questions, please contact me. And of course, I'm available Wednesdays in office hours. And there is a big blue button link and 11 to 1. All right, thanks very much. Bye.